Hello and welcome back. Today I want to talk about the Quran and its use of taking from other sources outside of the Quran. But first and foremost, we need to go to the text itself, specifically Surah chapter 19, verse 22 through 25. It says, "And she conceived him, and she withdrew with him to a far place. And the pangs of childbirth drove her to the trunk of the palm tree. She said, 'Oh, if only I had died before this and had become nothing, forgotten.' Then he called out to her from beneath her, saying, 'Do not grieve, your Lord has placed a stream beneath you, and shake the trunk of the palm tree towards you, and you will cause ripe dates to fall upon you.'" So what this is going on here, we have Mary who conceived Jesus, and then we have her stopping, and then Jesus is talking to her from inside of her and telling her to basically shake the palm tree, and then dates will come and fall upon her. But if we need to notice that this is actually taken from another text, specifically the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. Now, the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew, according to the Lexham Bible Dictionary, is a non-canonical early 7th century work, so that's between 600 and 625 AD. It's an infancy gospel that claims to narrate the conception, birth, and early childhood of Mary, the mother of Jesus, and Jesus himself. And of course, the important thing to note here is that this work here was never widely authoritative in the early church period, nor could it have been based on its late date. So what it's saying here is that the Pseudo-Gospel of Matthew is an early 7th century work that was used, but it was known, but it was not authoritative within the early church. The point is that people knew that it was a false gospel, but it was never considered to be authoritative. But the point I want to make here is that the Quran actually takes from this work. And I'm going to read a good portion of it so you can get an idea. It says, "And it came to pass on the third day of the journey, while they were walking, that the blessed Mary was fatigued by the excessive heat of the sun in the desert, and seeing the palm tree, she said to Joseph, 'Let me rest a little while under the shade of this tree.' Joseph therefore made haste and led her to the palm, and made her come down from her beast. And as the blessed Mary was sitting there, she looked up to the foliage of the palm and saw it full of fruit, and said to Joseph, 'I wish it were possible to get some of the fruit of this palm.' And Joseph said to her, 'I wonder that thou hast said this, when thou seest how high the palm tree is, and that you think of eating its fruit. I'm thinking more of the want of water, because the skins are now empty, and they have none wherein to refresh ourselves and our cattle.'" Now here's the important part. It says, "Then the child Jesus, with a joyful countenance, reposing in the bosom of his mother, said to the palm, 'O tree, blend thy branches, and refresh my mother with thy fruit.' And immediately at those words the palms bent down to the very feet of the blessed Mary, and she gathered from the fruit with which was there to refresh. And after that they gathered all the fruit, it remained bent down, waiting the order to rise from him." So what we have here is we have the palm tree once again bending down at the command of Jesus to allow his mother to get it. So what we have here is Jesus once again speaking in order to allow his mother to be refreshed. So my point is that the Quran takes from this text and inserts it into the Quran. Now, why is this important? It's important because there's a charge leveled against Muhammad in the Quran that the Muslims, of course, they don't agree with, and they believe it's not right, but it's the idea of people saying that Muhammad is the ear because he takes what he hears and he puts these stories, these fables into the Quran and passes them off as the Word of God. But if we do historical research, we can understand that the texts that the Quran takes from are false texts, or they're other writings from different groups, and yet he passes them off as the word of God. And yet you can see that if he's taking it from other sources, then he's not actually receiving revelation from God. And what I mean by that is because even if you look at, whenever he first received his revelations in the cave, he thought he was possessed because the angel, well, he called it an angel, was very violent to him. And honestly, I'll be honest with you, I think it was a demon that he found in the cave, because he was scared to death. But yet Muslims seem to think he's a prophet of God. Well, here's the thing. If you look at your sources, he didn't think he was a prophet of God until his wife Khadijah told him he was. So even Muhammad had doubts. So the point is that the Quran has taken from multiple different sources and shoved it all into one source, and that's specifically why the Quran, at least the people within the Quran that are charging Muhammad with making it or taking these fables and inserting them into the Quran, that's why they're doing it. They're doing it because he's taking sources outside of the Quran and putting them there and passing them off as the words of God whenever we know they're not the words of God. So I want you to consider, Muslims, if you would actually do research instead of waiting for people to do it for you, if you would take the initiative and do it, then you would see that a lot of your texts found within the Quran are actually taken outside of the Quran, which means that once again the Quran is not eternal because it takes from outside sources.